Ever after comes after we meet.
Hey all, and welcome back. Today's book is The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston, and I feel like maybe it deserves a spot in my December lineup, because even though it wasn't my favorite, which is usually what I reserve for my December, February lineups, but it was something of a miracle, because I didn't hate it. I'm of two minds of this novel, and while it wasn't groundbreaking, it was entertaining, but I did think it was somewhat disparate. I liked the beginning. The inciting incident was really what I was like, excuse me? It wasn't until the end when I saw how she brought kind of both storylines together that saved the book. But if it weren't for me being too stubborn to quit, I would not have finished this book. So I never would have gotten to the end, and I never would have seen how everything ties together, and that's problematic. I did know that there was going to be a twist, and in my opinion, I thought there were sort of two twists. Were they entirely unforeseen? No. But because I was so fixated on the fact that I didn't know why these storylines went together, I just didn't pay attention. The twists, I thought, saved the book. But on the whole, the book shouldn't have needed saving. But good book. Really enjoyed the narrator. I thought she did a great job. She was another aspect that kept me going in this novel. While I didn't really look forward to coming back to the novel, it was really easy to get through. It moved very quickly. So another check in the positive column. As for the nitty-gritty, our main character is a young woman named Florence, and she's a ghostwriter for a very well-known romance writer named Ann Nichols. But the thing about Ann Nichols is she has not seen nor heard from her in 5 years, and Ann must be up in Maine living her best life, but she has been contracted to finish out Ann's contract. The only problem is she just went through a really bad breakup. Does she feel like writing romance? No. Actually, these days, she feels like romance is dead. She's coming to her editor to ask for an extension, only to realize that she has a new editor, a guy named Benji Andor. I'm going to pause right here and say, I would never have put this together had I not read other people's reviews, but apparently he/she are like a fanfic for Star Wars. I've seen the original Star Wars. I've seen a little bit of their precursors, but I have not seen the newest installments. So I have nothing to add to this, except for the people who did realize that this is a fanfic sort of romance are not happy about it. I thought the romance was pretty good, honestly, except for the fact that we had two disparate stories going on here. I thought it was sweet. I can't complain as an objective third-party observer. But just putting that out there. The moment she sees Benji, she's like, I want to climb that man. But then the rational side of her brain is like, don't do it. Don't climb that man. He's your new editor. He's like, hey, I need Anne's book because she's posing as his assistant. She knows she should tell him, I'm the ghostwriter. It's not going to happen, but for some reason, she can't tell him this. So she leaves dejected, goes home to eat her depressed mac and cheese, and her best friend/roommate Rose is like, we're going to go out. She takes her to this cool hipster literary club. She's like, you need to go up there and you need to read your work. The one thing about Florence that we do learn early on is that she sees dead people. Take that for what you will. While the majority of what she has written has been romance, she's got some other things up her sleeve. She did write and publish her own novel, which flopped. And so she doesn't really want to read anything, especially she doesn't want to write anything romancy, but she does have some kind of like ghosty elementy thingies that she could read. So she's like, okay, yes, I'm gonna be brave. She gets up to go read, only to run into her ex. I can't remember his name for the life of me. This book, it got returned. Like, it automatically returned before I could write down my notes, and nobody would write down her ex's name, so I can't remember his name. Even when we were reading this novel, I was like, what is his name? Like, I could not remember his name. I keep wanting to call him Will, so we might name him Will. She runs smack dab into him and what he's doing. The reason they broke up, he is an editor as well. They had met at a party. He's super hot. Turns out, not entirely truthful with her about things. At one point, she had decided, I'm gonna tell him the truth about me. I'm gonna tell him that I can see ghosts. And this is a trait that she shares with her father, which I have feelings. But when she tells him, he kind of laughs at her. He's like, are you serious? So she pretends that it's a story. She continues to tell him stories, which are based on fact. And he's like, you need to put this into a novel. And she's like, nah, like, I don't write that kind of stuff. I'm a romance writer. She grew up with her parents having an epic love story. She loves romance. Then one day, he tells her, hey, I'm writing a book and I'm getting my book picked up. He goes out to do something and she's like, let me look at his notes, only to realize that he has stolen all of her stories and he is putting it together as his own novel and claiming it as his own. Sidebar here, I was kind of torn between this. Because it is like intellectual property of sorts. It is a betrayal of trust because these are her stories, these are her truths. But at the same time, I mean, he's a no good dude. Like, I'm not excusing what he did, but I do think it's interesting because he told her. He was like, you need to turn this into a book. If you do not turn this into a book, somebody else will. Was it underhanded of him to be that person? Absolutely. But on one level, I just kept thinking, why is she upset when she gave him her stories? She refused to keep her stories for herself. It also goes back to her character where she does grow throughout the novel, which is good. So I understand why she starts out kind of meek and defenseless at first. But I don't particularly care for female characters who don't stand up for themselves and who have no convictions, in a sense. Anyways, she runs into him and she's like, nope, not doing this. So she leaves only to run into Benji. They had this hot little makeout session. It's interrupted by a phone call. Her dad has died. We did have a scene earlier that expressed that he has some cardiac issues. He won't go to the doctor. He's like, I'll go to the doctor later, and too later is too late. Now she's devastated, and she's got to go home. Unfortunately, she's supposed to turn in that manuscript the next day. I'm cool with this. Like, I really enjoy all of this. Something about what's happened is going to be the driving force in her getting through her writer's block, because she's basically written the entire book. She just can't write the end. And I thought it was funny how whenever she did try to write this end, because it was one of those cliched Hallmark things where there's the misunderstanding, the omission of the truth, and when the truth comes out, both parties are upset. And so now the parties are supposed to be coming back together, and she just has the female protagonist like punching this dude's lights out every time. I thought it was funny, but a lot of people did point out that she's supposed to be this brilliant writer, but we don't actually get to see much of that. And on some level, it got a little bit annoying to hear about she's almost like this prodigy, yet what comes of it? She seems to have so much going for her. I don't know how much she's getting paid, but she's getting paid to ghostwrite for the most successful romance writer of their time. And she's completely broke. But there's a lot of comments that I understand, because I was waiting to really be like, well, why is she so great? I want to know what's so great about her, because all she does is complain about all these other factors. She's in New York, and home is in North Carolina. She has not been home in decades because she had helped solve a murder of her old classmate because his ghost led her to the murderer. She makes the mistake of letting a reporter know about this. The reporter actually puts it in the paper, so she's essentially persecuted by the entire town. Would you expect the town to continue to have reservations about her when she comes back? Yes. Do they all treat her like she's the prodigal son returned? Yes. I thought that didn't make sense. Because it's one thing to have it in your head that nobody likes you. It's another thing for her to actually be bullied and tortured to the extent that she's got to leave town. This is why her family always comes to her and they understand that she's not going to come home, is because she's not welcome there. So why is she welcome there when she comes back? A weirdo is still a weirdo no matter how much time has passed. It's not he ate his own booger. Or like, this girl claims to talk to dead people and they helped her solve a murder. Two different kind of weirdos. Like, that's something that's a little hard to get over and hard to grow out of. Right away, we know that she's got some kind of problems with her sister Alice. Her brother Carver seems pretty cool, and I love the fact that he's always trying to guess who she ghostwrites for, because an NDA means that she can't tell anybody who she writes for, although I think she did tell Rose. And I think Rose also knows that she sees dead people. But she comes home and there's a little bit of tension because they're just finishing with the reading of the will. Her flight was delayed, but they didn't even wait for her. The dad has left some instructions. I've got this letter that I want read at my funeral by Florence. I really have no other instructions except I want these couple wishes to be honored. One is to have 6 of Crows at my funeral. I want Elvis to sing at my funeral. I've ordered all of my party supplies. You guys just have to go pick them up. I want 1,000 wildflowers. They own a funeral home. It's called Day's Funeral Home. And I thought that was actually kind of clever, the way that she would incorporate the last name of Day. Days gone by, and then she'd be like, oh, it's passed down day to day. I thought she had some really nice moments in there. I did think some of the dialogue tags in particular were kind of cheesy and amateurish. They still have funerals they have to take care of. So as they're going to do that, she's like, I'll just take up the mantle and take care of all of Dad's last wishes. It gets tied up in the end, but as we get to the end, I couldn't figure out why these things were important, why they were relevant. There was no mention given. There was just all this stuff happening because the two storylines that we're having here is her romance with Benji and then her dad's death. They're very different subject matters, and because we are so focused on the romance, the grief got overshadowed. It just became really hard to connect with her because we're like, this is not very realistic. I'm suspending my belief that she can talk to ghosts. But at the same time, grief and death are grief and death. I kept expecting to have more of the grief aspect because the dad, slight spoiler, he never shows up. He's not a ghost. He's not hanging around. I kind of expected her to be wanting that because he was who she was closest to. I kept wanting things to continue to circle back to her dad and her childhood and her upbringing and her trauma and getting over the loss of her father, when really it was more about her romance with Ben. Here's the kicker. Here's where I really had to take a step back and say, I don't know if I can keep up with this novel. There's a knock on the door and Ben is there, but he's a ghost. And I was just blown away. This is not new. It's not news. It is part of the summary that she goes home for her dad's funeral only for something to come knock on the door. I didn't expect that. It's a good and bad surprise. We are not expecting this. Ben is supposed to be her love interest. How can he be her love interest if he's dead? She hears from Rose that he had been hit by a car coming home from work. We're just moving along in this novel, and it's about her and Ben. She's assuming that he's hanging around because she needs to finish that manuscript, and once she does, then he can go. He's unlike a lot of the other ghosts in that he's hearing things and he's popping in and out, and he's not behaving the way she's used to ghosts behaving. But she just chalks it up to, I guess, his unfinished business. I was thinking she has these tasks to do for her dad. Okay, so if Ben's going to be hanging around, he can be hanging around while she's trying to achieve these tasks. But she doesn't really try very hard. She finds the Elvis singer right away, Turns out this dude from where her dad would play poker is an Elvis impersonator. The party supplies are pretty simple, although you do feel like something's up with that because the employee's like, these are the supplies you want, but then we have nothing further mentioned about these party supplies until the end. And then she's just trying to find these flowers, but she can't find them because it's too expensive if she actually had a florist do it. And it's out of season for her to go and pick them herself. Although the one place that she would probably find them is the one place that she doesn't want to go. And I think she called it the Ridge, which ends up being where her classmate had died. Because of all of that, it was a traumatic place for her, so she doesn't want to go back. Personally, I thought it was given a level of importance that it didn't really need, given that it had very little to do with anything. The crows follow dead people around. Benji is there. Why are we so worried about catching crows? Her family knows, whether or not they believe, that she talks to dead people. So why can't Benji just bring the crows with him? There were these elements that they play a part in the end, but they're given so much importance, and they're kind of like her driving factor while she's in town, but she doesn't really do anything about them. It's really more about her and Ben falling in love, and then her overcoming her own demons, which is totally fine. But the whole death of the father and then her love interest showing up dead was so discordant. I love a good ghost story, and I love a good tragedy. I mean, Kate Morton, I feel, does it so well, where you want them to be together and they can't be together. So I'm loving the idea that he's supposed to be her love interest. How can he be her love interest if they can't be together? How are we gonna fix this in the end? But it didn't really play out that way. The whole time that I was going through this book, I was like, why do I care? Except there was good humor, narration was done well, it was an easy read, but in terms of story, I can see why people had issues, because there were big issues that really did not get worked through. And then there was a small issue that was the main focus. One event that does happen is she had one main tormentor. I think the girl's name was Heather. Heather leads a book club that takes place at the hotel where Florence is staying. And that's another thing where everybody's like, oh, I loved how this book took place at a funeral home. And I was like, but it didn't really take place at a funeral home. Her family owns the funeral home, and then Alice is the new caretaker, essentially. But it doesn't take place at the funeral home. There are scenes at the funeral home, but it takes place in the town. For some reason, Florence is like, I can't go home, because they don't even live at the funeral home. If they'd lived at the funeral home, it would make more sense. But at one point when she was younger, a ghost had wanted to say his last goodbyes to himself. So she'd ended up getting locked in the basement all night because the door locked behind her, and her parents realized it wasn't safe. And I'm like, but nothing happened. She fell asleep. She was not even traumatized. But she's like, we had to move out of the funeral home because of this incident. I'm like, but was that an incident? Were you scarred for life? Like, did he try to attack you? She decides, I don't want to stay at my parents' house. She goes to this hotel. She runs into her arch nemesis. Of course, everybody's like talking crap about her. The irony of all of this is that they are reading the book that she ghost wrote for Ann Nichols. There's also this whole thing about how her local bookstore can't keep her book in stock. If she's such a great writer, and literally every person we run into who has read her book praises her like she's the best thing since sliced bread, how did it flop? And then her ex, we get the idea that maybe it wasn't a good idea because her ex is like, oh, well, it was just fluff. Well, of course it's fluff in some respects. It's romance. But is it a bad book to you because it's romance? Or is it an actually bad book? Because apparently this entire town thinks it's a great book. Which, again, if you don't like her, why are you buying her book? I don't know, but every person she runs into is like, oh, it's so great to meet you, or it's so great to see you. Except for the town sheriff, because apparently she was a nuisance of sorts because of when she was growing up and all the ghostly activities that she would get into got on his bad side. What did that have to do with anything? I don't know, except that there is a scene where she and Ben go to the graveyard and it's locked. I know I'm on like 8 different tangents right now, When we first get into town and we witness the finishing of the reading of the will, we meet two characters. Woman named Karen, who, town lawyer, she's reading the will, and then her son Seaborn, who is the caretaker of the cemetery. I had to go back and figure out who he was because I could not remember. Seaborn, she's like, oh, it doesn't matter, I can go in there, I know the owner. The only problem is I'm banned from there because the sheriff had banned her. Why does it matter if your friend owns the land? Why does it matter what the sheriff is saying? Because your friend is the one who's going to press charges. But also, and I liked the attempt at this, and I only actually saw one person make a comment about this, but the town mayor is a dog. Yeah, it's cute, but I was like, why? Why does the town mayor have to be a dog? Because it feels like this is really what could push something over the edge into cliche land. Yeah, sure, it's fun, but couldn't Seaborn actually be the mayor, but everybody just acts like the dog is the mayor? Oh no, the dog is actually the mayor. How? I know I'm suspending my belief, but this was one thing too many in a certain respect. So the book club is reading the book. You know that Heather is talking about her with these ladies, and Florence finally stands up for herself and is like, look, I don't really care what you have to say about me, blah, 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 puts her in her place. Seems like this is what spurs Heather into becoming a better person, because she organizes for the town to collect money for these wildflowers that they need at the father's funeral. Dumbfounded. Why Heather, who for I don't know, maybe more than a decade. I think she was 13 or 14 when the whole murder thing, and I also have to say that she helped solve a murder. I was like, that's a heavy-hitting topic right there. It felt odd. I would have liked something else to have occurred that was a little bit more lighthearted, because they don't really talk about the murder. We do learn it was her classmate, and it was her classmate's dad. Could it have been something else related to you and ghosts and how it got widespread and everybody was mean to you about it? But for what, 17 years? Heather was her arch nemesis, and Heather did not like her. And after one confrontation, Heather decides, I'm going to be nice to her, period. And I'm going to make sure that this entire town pitches in to get flowers for her dad. Which, on another hand, obviously, he was smarter about announcing his ability to talk to dead people. So maybe this is why he was more beloved in this town than she was. But I would have liked to have seen a little bit more support from her family in that regard. Particularly something from the dad about, this is how I got through it, this is how I deal with it. On the note of family, this was another subplot where she doesn't get along with Alice, but there's an underlying tension in general. Then it comes to light that it doesn't seem like they actually believe that she could talk to ghosts, even though the mom does. A little bit of a gray area for me. I didn't think we needed the family tension. I don't feel like it was resolved very well. It seems that Alice would stick up for Florence a lot. She would get in a lot of fights for Florence. She would defend Florence. And then after Florence left and never came back, this embittered Alice. Valid, but that was it. I was expecting something much more deep-seated. Finally, Florence does bring it up and they kind of talk it out, but it's like one scene and then they're hunky-dory. I didn't need that extra layer. I thought it took away focus from these two plot lines that I'm trying to navigate already. What ultimately heals all wounds is that Florence decides, I want to write my story. Like, I need to go and I need to do my thing. She goes to find her secret stash, which apparently each child had a secret hiding place on their property to put all of their secret stuff. She opens up the floorboard, she opens the box to find a note from her dad. It's like a note of support, of encouragement, of like, I love you, I've always believed in you. Attached to this are receipts of all of the books that she has ghostwritten. And it's at this moment we learn Her dad knew that she was Ann Nichols' ghostwriter the entire time. Carver, her brother, even though he was always guessing who she ghostwrote for, apparently knew the entire time. Alice knew. Her mother knew. It seems like the entire town knew that she ghostwrote for Ann Nichols. So here I am thinking, oh, if they only knew. If these people only knew that somebody that they made miserable did something that they enjoyed so much, and they did know. I didn't need any of that. I thought it weakened that particular part of the plot, of the novel, of the characterization. How did they know? I know we have a distinctive style when we write, but if you're a ghostwriter, you're supposed to match that style. So how did they know? That's not explained. We're getting to the end, the first twist. Florence and Ben have said their final goodbye. We've gotten to this point where when he fades away, this is the very last time that she's gonna see him. He has come in and out. Now we have established this was the last time she was gonna see him. Rose shows up and she's like, oh my gosh, I just got a text. Ben is alive. Pardon me? And this was the thing. I knew from the beginning we were jumping to conclusions because Rose does say, hey, Ben got hit by a car, but Rose never says Ben died. Florence just assumes Ben died because she had seen Ben's ghost. I didn't know how to feel about this. I mean, I loved it because awesome. This whole relationship that we've been experiencing this entire time that I'm like, why are we going through this if it can't go anywhere? I'm like, awesome. They can actually have the relationship that they want because they've both realized they're perfect for each other. Because the same place that she had met her ex was also an event that Ben had been at. And he had said, hey, I need to go talk to her, but then the ex got there first. And so there were all these chance encounters, and he's just saying, I missed out on a lot of things in my life. I wish I'd done these things different. And so now we're like, yes, he can do the things he wanted to do. But how does Florence not realize, like, if you've ever seen Ghost Whisperer, there were some moments where I was like, you've been doing this in your entire life. How do you not know better by now? How do you not know more by now? So why has she never experienced this before? That she's engaging with somebody who's not actually dead. I felt like there was a little bit of a flaw in the development of this I see dead people aspect. It seems that he got hit by the car, but his life wasn't really in any danger. He was in a coma. This took place over about a week. He was in a coma for a week only because he was spending time with Florence versus actually have life-threatening injuries. So again, for me, it didn't make a whole lot of sense. But she's like, what? He's alive? She goes home. She's like, I've got to go see him. She gets to the hospital. She sees that his ex is there, and she's just like, nope, they're gonna be together. She runs into her ex, who she finally takes out some of her aggression on, and she closes the chapter on that. All of her trauma is healed. So she goes home. She spends the next 3 months finishing that book for Ann Nichols. It's so great that her agent is like, I want to represent you now that you're done here. And she's like, oh, but I don't know. She's gonna go home because it's kind of maybe, I think it's like a celebration of life for her dad. It's only 3 months later. But she's heard nothing from Ben. She has not tried to contact him. Apparently he's been out of the office recovering all this time. And she's like, I need to see him one more time before I go. I have the perfect reason, because he had said that he had read her book and he had loved it. She's thinking he must not remember anything since he hasn't contacted me in 3 months. But my last ditch effort is I will bring him a signed copy of my book. She gets there, and yeah, he definitely remembers her. They patch things up, but our second twist is that his grandmother was Ann Nichols. I kind of saw that coming too, just from some things that had been said, and it seems that Ann Nichols had recruited Florence around the time of her death. I think she was actually dead when she did approach Florence at a coffee shop, because she had been so weak around the time she should have approached Florence, that she could have actually done it. So it must have been right after she died. Florence has told him all of this while he was a ghost, and he's like, it just doesn't make sense. So there's little breadcrumbs where when we finally get that reveal, we're like, oh, that's why he reacted the way he reacted. It was a good reveal. It wasn't entirely surprising, but it was a good reveal. I liked how it wrapped things up. She literally goes to his office on her way to the airport. He's like, hey, let's get dinner. And she says, I can't. I'm going out of town. I'm going back home because now everything is hunky-dory at home. He's like, well, can I come with you? He comes with her. They finally get to do the things they couldn't do because he had no physical form. The whole family loves him. And like, they knew he existed because he helped her cheat at a card game that she's not very good at. So she had to admit that a ghost was helping her. If they didn't believe before, they believe now. That's The Dead Romantics. If you're looking for a beach read, I say pick it up. Do I think that it should have been handled differently in some respects? Absolutely. The death of the father could have been different. The impetus for her to go home could have been something else. Maybe her dad had already died a long time ago. She had moved through that, and now she's coming back for that celebration of life. But there's all these things about being home that she's wary of. I would have liked to have seen her dad show up. There's also a moment where the song playlist, she's like, I never wrote that down, like that had to have been my dad. And she's like, hey dad, and he never pops up. So I'm like, well, who wrote the playlist? Where did the playlist come from? Before I continue to go in circles, I hope you've enjoyed my review. If you have any more recommendations for me, I'd love to hear it. Always thanks for hanging out with me. Bye.